Well, it's great to be here. This is a ton of fun. I'm originally from Dallas, and I see a lot of familiar faces, people who knew me as a child, knew me growing up, and obviously our work is how we develop as people. And so it's a great opportunity for me to be able to share my work with Dallas, the city that made me, and with people that I've known for a long time, and with the Dallas Architecture Forum, which is a distinguished body. I've seen a lot of great lectures here. It's a great library of information and promotion of architecture, so that's great. With that being said, I'm not an architect. I grew up here in Dallas, and then I went to Northwestern University in Chicago, where I studied philosophy. That's relevant only because philosophy is what motivates our work. I then went to New York City and was an entrepreneur. And after a few years of being an entrepreneur there, thankfully I became a bit successful, and I started driving around Detroit, Michigan, as well as other cities, looking for real estate to buy. My business in New York was that I was in the billboard business. And it was basically the only way that a young guy like me could get into the real estate game. I would go and I would lease walls around the city. I'd get on my bicycle late at night where there was no traffic with a zoning map, and I'd come back to my office the next day with addresses and addresses and addresses, and I'd call the owners of buildings asking to lease their walls. And once I learned how to do that, I had the idea that I wanted to go to a city where the real estate was undervalued and I could buy inexpensive real estate and carry the property with signage. And so I went all over the country. I ended up in Detroit. This was back in 2012. At the time, Detroit was going through very tough times. And I'm giving you a little bit of a context as I show you my work now. The way that I'm structuring my presentation this evening is that I'll show you some photographs of a lot of our completed projects, interjected with philosophy that motivates the projects. Not only philosophy that motivates the projects, but that also has been derived from significant mistakes within the projects. So I will begin. So what do we do exactly? We create celebrated restaurants. We imagine and build award-winning residential projects. We imagine and build award-winning mixed-use projects. This is our project in Fort Worth, Texas. We revive and transform previously abandoned buildings. So this is a before shot of the building here, and this is after. Same, before and after. Before and after, you see we added a second story onto this existing building here. I'm going to get into a lot of the thinking behind these projects as well. I'm just giving y'all an introduction right now. We have our own little cafe, which we run and operate ourselves. We plant copious amounts of trees to create and beautify public space and to secure an inspired future. And this is an image of our laboratory, our studio, our office. I like to call it those three things because when I think about work, the laboratory portion of our office is seeking truth, seeking precision. There's definitely a truth in what a good project actually is, or in our case, we're aspiring towards a great project, and the laboratory is trying to discover that. The studio part of our office, which is also very relevant to us, is we all have life experience, and it's where we express what's inside of us, from the places we've traveled, to the art that we've seen, to the architecture we've experienced. The studio is an attempt to try to express all the things that we've done in our life and to try to bring it out into the world and share something unique. And then the office is what makes it profitable. So the combination of those three things is what we're always after, and this is where it happens in Detroit. This building, when I purchased it, was derelict, totally abandoned, and now you'll see some of the other things that occupy it. So some thoughts before we begin. I want to clarify the word investment was used in introducing me, and nothing wrong with that, Nate, but we are developers, not investors. I'll clarify what that means in a little bit. Our goal, we create value, we do not buy it. With work, we communicate our belief. When what we believe is interesting and intelligent, we create value. The more we work, the more efficiently we are able to express what we believe. Our business, the creation and leasing of space. Our work, the projects that manifest such space. Our art, the imperfect and ever-evolving interpretation, digestion, and then expression of our entire lived experience. At their best, our projects are beautiful spaces that honestly tell you about the people, time, and place that they were built. At their worst, they're studies for the next project. Success is the ability to express our belief via our work. Experience and mistakes have informed our evolution, and here's our work. So, as I said, I'm going to show you a lot of images, and interjected there'll be bits of philosophy. So things that really motivate cornerstones. I think that work isn't interesting unless it has a point of view. And points of view are great things, and they can also be things that create friction. I can have a point of view that a lot of you might disagree with, and that's okay. That's what creates heat, and that's what creates energy. So points of view are the cornerstones of our work. I don't just make things to make things. I make things to try to bring something that's in my brain out into the world, and to either rub some people the right way and to maybe rub some people the wrong way. Hopefully, after this presentation, I think oftentimes the most interesting part of a presentation is the question and answer. That's where you can really improvise and really test, my legs, so to speak, and see what I really know. And so I'm hoping that'll be fun and engaging as well. But developer is preservationist. I'm always taken by the fact that development projects today, they want as much scale and as many units as possible. And the funny thing is, it never matches what's actually there. I find oftentimes people aren't paying attention to the place they actually want to develop. And it blows my mind. There's something about a place that makes you want to be there. Why would you want to change all the zoning code, get a variance, change the entire scale, change the materials, change the entire program of a place that made you say, I want to be here anyway? Our entire work does the totally opposite thing. We look and listen to what's around us. I always like to reference jazz music. In jazz, the musicians really listen to each other and they improvise. So I show up to a place and I try to listen and hear and understand what actually made that place interesting to me. And then I work. And a developer, in essence, I think, if he's sensitive or she's sensitive, is listening to a place and trying to really deftly bring out what's special about it. So what I did in Detroit was this. I started visiting Detroit and I drive around the city. Detroit was built for 2.5 million people and it only has 700,000. There were two cities in the world have this condition, which the condition is more infrastructure than population. The first is Berlin, built for 8 million with the ambition of being the capital of Europe after World War II. It only has 4.5 million. And the other is Detroit, built for 2.5 million with only 700,000 people. As you all know, as Dallasites, there's always construction, there's always highway projects, there's always infrastructure projects. Most cities have outgrown their infrastructure. Population surpasses the amount of infrastructure that's built. Detroit was a very unique place, and I really couldn't understand it because I'd never experienced anything like it. If you go to a developing country, the developing areas are the opposite. There's no infrastructure, and there's people littered on top of each other. I'd never gone to a place that was lower socioeconomic status, let's say, that was just totally empty. I hadn't seen that in a proper city, flying into an international airport with all the sports teams, concert halls and everything, and just no people. And I visited Detroit 12 times, once a month, from 2012 to 2013, and I just drove and I drove and I drove, and I approached the city the same way I approached my billboard company, which was I'd go back to New York with a list of addresses, and I'd start calling owners of buildings. Do you want to sell your building? Every single one of them wanted to, and I knew that I was in the right place. So this is downtown Detroit. My first project, which you'll see in a moment, was a little restaurant here. And then the rest of our work is up here, 2.5 miles from downtown Detroit. Intentionally, it was an area where there was nothing going on. Nothing. There were 3 operational houses in this entire 25-acre region where I began to work. Every person who was a developer in Detroit told me to stay away. But my intuition told me that that was the opportunity there. There were plenty of places that you're told to develop around the country. There are very few places where I actually had the opportunity to buy an entire neighborhood in one of the world's most historic cities and actually do something. And you'll see in our philosophy that that's the whole idea, is that I saved my capital. I ended up selling my business in New York, and that's how I started to develop in Detroit. I saved my capital on acquisition. I didn't spend it on acquisition. I invested it into product. So, and you'll see how that manifests. So the scope of the property is 23 acres. We've built 77,000 so far. We've developed 120,000 square feet of land, 53,000 square feet of public space, and 600 plus trees have been planted. Now, I want to also note 600 plus trees have been planted in conjunction with, I've built 30 apartments. You know, it's that kind of balance that I'm using to try to make a place. So this is Core City where I'm working historically. You'll see I built a public park where these two structures are. I'm developing all this land right now. I've developed all these buildings. My office sits right there. This corner's been developed by me. This is what it looked like in the 1930s. So there was a lot of action, and our development work in large part when we work with the land is archaeology as much as it is development, and that's been a very significant part of our work too. You can see now a map of the projects and how they're all connected to each other. This is where I have 23 contiguous acres, and this is where there were 3 operational houses. So another part of our work that's important is that rules set us free. I like to look at the zoning code. I like to try to work within it. I don't like to work with architects who think that we can do anything because this is Detroit, Michigan, and they want any and all investment. I think that rules give us boundaries, and those boundaries are what make a game. If a soccer field had no boundaries, there would be no game to play. So we respect all the rules, including lower socioeconomic statuses, including a less vibrant economy than Dallas, Texas might have. And what that does is it begins to inform our scale and how that manifests on our first project, this was the first building that I bought. I sent this gentleman, this young man who owned this building, a Facebook message asking to buy his building. I couldn't get a hold of him on a phone number. And I bought the building for like 4 months of what my apartment rent in New York was. And this was the status of the building when I purchased it. And it was a 1,800 square foot garage. And when I talk about rules setting us free, I wanted to turn this into a restaurant. And I wanted to start with a restaurant very simply because I knew my bigger picture was to buy a neighborhood and to bring people there. And if you think about it, a restaurant sees about 5,000 people a month, maybe more and maybe less. And that's an audience. And as soon as you gain somebody's trust with an amazing restaurant, they might follow you somewhere else. And I knew that the key to developing my neighborhood 5 minutes from here, where Core City is, was going to be to have an audience, a dedicated audience that liked what I did and that I could bring them there. It's a lot easier. They say that neighborhoods start with coffee. Well, it makes sense. It's a $3 investment, today maybe a $5 investment, and 10 minutes of your time to buy a cup of coffee. You're willing to go try a new neighborhood for that. A restaurant's 2 hours of your time and maybe $50 or $60. Renting an apartment somewhere is a bit more of a risk. It's a year of your time and $1,000 to $2,000 a month of your dollars. So I knew that to get people comfortable in a new neighborhood, it wasn't going to be to start with housing. It had to be with a restaurant. And so we took this building and we made this beautiful little restaurant called Katoy. I found a chef who had a food truck, and he was making the best Thai food. I'd already designed the restaurant as a diner, and we kind of retrofitted it. I worked with an architect who worked with Rim Cool House previously. His name's Ish Rafudin. We've done a lot of projects together now. He moved from New York to Detroit to work with me. And I met this chef then, and we retrofitted this diner that we'd kind of designed. We wanted like a nightlife diner into a Thai restaurant, and it worked perfectly, and his food's amazing. And this is what it looked like. Looks like, kind of, you'll learn in a second what that means. We really wanted to preserve the character of the walls, and we just very simply intervened and tried to maintain the character of the place. So this restaurant was open for 11 months and won every award you could win in the restaurant industry. One of America's best 6 restaurants and all sorts of stuff. We won all the awards. And then after it was open for 11 months, somebody broke in trying to steal alcohol and burn the place down. Okay. So, and look, I understood this. I understood that I wasn't working in Provost, Utah. I knew that I was in downtown Detroit. And that was an understanding. And I always say, you have to know the sport that you're playing. And I very much understood the sport that I was playing in Detroit. I also understood that because that was a rule that could exist within the sport, it also allowed me as a young person with not a ton of capital to buy an entire neighborhood. And so I'm always balancing those understandings. And if somebody wants to complain about this sort of activity in a place, I just understand what the opportunity is on the other side. And there's always architectural solutions for our problems. So let's see. So this was the fire. So I wanted to rebuild the restaurant. I immediately started like the next day. And I couldn't get insurance if I didn't have a fence. And so Ish, the architect, and I sat down. And the way the zoning code read, I know I said I respect zoning, said that the max height for a fence was 6 feet. Now, I wasn't in any way, shape, or form going to put a 6-foot chain link fence around the most sought-after restaurant in the country. So we tried to figure out an architectural solution for how we were going to deal with this. And we had the idea to create this structure that was the same height as the building, chain link fence, and it was the same height of the building. And the idea was to create an outdoor room. And this is the result. And so we rebuilt the restaurant in 6 months. For every single foot of fence that I implemented, 14 feet of fence, we planted a tree. So we have 14 trees within this 14-foot fence. It's a little oasis. And it has amazing life. People love the restaurant. It's great again. And it's been open now since 2017. So it's doing great. So this project taught me that we know how to cultivate an audience. And so I began to understand and study other places that were maybe of a different sort than they wanted to become, industrial areas that had regenerated. And the consistent thread was that it's always the quality of the space that attracts people. People talk about artists being the first people to move someplace. And it isn't that the artists have some sort of antenna that tells them to go somewhere. It's that they're willing to make a sacrifice for quality space. Quality space inspires their work. It allows their work to be larger. And so I understood that I needed to make space, and that's what we do. I don't unitize space as most developers try to do. I'm not an expert at financing the construction of space. I make space, and that's what motivates everything that we do. So how did I want to explore making space? This was our first project, and I'm going to zoom forward. I saw this picture of Berlin after World War II, and I saw this and I said, this is very interesting. You know, this is made by people that don't have experience in construction, the GIs. You have community spaces. I don't know if that's a community garden that they're growing their food here, and you have these nice spaces in between. And the interesting is they could be assembled quickly, and there's no columns. So I had the idea that I wanted to create space in this new neighborhood with the Quonset hut. And so I started with a project. I call this the study. I built this. This is going to go on YouTube, but I don't have permits for this project. I built this like an architect builds a model in their office. I built this as a model, a life-size model, because I needed an office and a place to stay in Detroit anyway. I was still living in New York. And I built these as a life-size model for the larger project that I was going to work with Edwin Chan on across the street and build. And they were a success, and you'll see what follows. In addition to this being an inspiration for the space that we made, I also, in 1957, Mies van der Rohe had completed a project in Detroit called Lafayette Park. And I'm lucky enough to live there. I purchased a place there in 2017 and renovated it. And, you know, landscape was a big part of what he did there. These are views. These are just my camera phone shots of where I live. I wake up in the morning, I walk outside, and I just have to take a picture of where I live so often. The light that comes through the locust trees, the greenery, it's just amazing. This actually exists in Detroit, Michigan, and it's dollar for dollar the best place to live in the country, I think. And this is a great inspiration for our work. And they are 100% basically glass houses. You have a full glass facade to the front and the back of your home, and then you share a wall with an adjacent townhome. So this is my house. This is a great inspiration for our work. I show it because it's really informed a lot of what we do in Core City. This is just a fun picture. This is Julie Bargman, our landscape architect. This is Edwin Chan, architect we work with. And then these are some landscape architects from Columbia that we're visiting. So everybody, before I do business with anybody, I bring them to Lafayette Park, whether it's a business person, a bank, or whoever it is. If they understand the amazingness of the place, we can do business. If they don't understand the amazingness of the place, no deal. Because it's the essence of what we're doing in Core City. So I touched on this earlier, and this is a really important point for us. I always want to remind my office that we're a development office, not an investment office. And what that means is the old rules of real estate, as I see it, are that location, location, location are what matter. And an investor takes their capital, and what's happening around where their project is matters so much to them. And they spend a copious amount of money buying their position, and then they spend as little money as they have to into the product. My idea was that to be a real developer, I wanted to take the majority of my capital and not invest it into the position or place, but rather invest it into the product. Really use architecture, really use landscape, really use my product to make a place. And there aren't a lot of places where that opportunity exists, and this is a very Detroit-specific philosophy that emerged from my work. But I want to bring people to a place they otherwise wouldn't have gone, and I want to pay a little bit for that land because nobody else wants it, and then I want to take all the money that I saved and put it into the product. And you'll see in a little bit, that manifests as an 8-unit apartment building planted in a 188-tree forest. That's literally the division of my most recent housing project in Detroit. Usually it's 188 apartments, maybe with 8 trees if you're lucky. And so my idea was that I needed to create a habitat that made people say, I don't care if that's a neighborhood where they say I shouldn't be. I can't live like this anywhere else. I live in a museum quality space in a world-class landscape. This is so unique. Whereas the investor would say, I don't like the location, so I'm not going to pay for it. This is True North project. This is our first residential project that we did in Core City. And this was when I showed up. This was the site. So you can kind of see the character of the neighborhood. I would call it tired, exhausted. And this is what it is today. Here's my studies, the 2 projects that I showed you. Those are the mock-ups where I didn't have permits and I just built these. And this is the project across the street here. And the idea, again, was use the Quonset hut. People think our work is about the Quonset hut. The Quonset hut is no different than a brick. It's no different than steel. It's no different than wood. It's a type of structure that can do certain things that other types of structure might not be able to. And what the Quonset hut can do is that it can span wide and it can span long without columns for an affordable price. And so people ask me all the time, is it cheaper to build a project in a Quonset hut? Not really, but what you do get is a higher quality of space for a comparable cost than what you would have spent on the same amount of square footage with traditional development. So you get museum quality spaces for a very reasonable cost to both yourself and to the tenant. And again, the spaces in between the units are very important. This is the project where I really learned about public space. Edwin, the architect that I work with, if I talk a little bit about the way we thought about it. So this was 5 lots that I merged. This is the middle lot, and these are 2 lots, and these are 2 lots. So Edwin, we designed this project in 3 days together. I went to his office, and I met him, and I was meeting a few architects, and he said, okay, great, you want to do a project with the Quonset hut. Tell me about what you're thinking. And we asked some questions. And the first question I always ask an architect when I want to work with them is, what is your non-negotiable? And what is the thing that you care about that I can't take away from you on this project, because now I know who I'm working with. And then I tell him my non-negotiables, which was on this project, I want to work with the Quonset hut. And his non-negotiables were about, he wanted to create spaces outside of the private leasable space where arts and culture could occupy them. And so we worked together to really create this sort of project where there's community gardens, and this is a space where yoga happens, and there's art displays. And so we came together with our non-negotiables, and we built this project. The details weren't figured out. Edwin was very flexible. We understood, like, what I always say is when the idea is big, the details matter less. You know, people are so blinded by the idea of me going to the middle of nowhere, building a housing community with Quonset huts, that they didn't even pay attention to the details, which were very subpar. I speak Spanish fluently, and to build this project, I got my own crew. I went down to the Home Depot in the Hispanic part of town, and I assembled my own crew of 15 workers, and we watched YouTube videos, and we put this project together. Okay? Not the most sensible way to do a development project, but what you feel is the made-by-hand quality, and what you sense is that this is a place like no other. There's no other development project where the developer is actually putting the project together by hand, and people show up and they say, that's amazing. And this was really my first development project. I talked about the restaurant, and this project won some of the most significant architecture awards that are to be awarded, a Progressive Architecture Award, the cover of magazines. I was a finalist with the Smithsonian African American Museum, one of 6 finalists for the Mies Crown Hall Americas Prize. The thinking behind this project really changed the way I started to think about my work, and introduced me to how important big ideas actually are and how important risk actually is. So, you know, they're beautiful spaces on the inside. You know, these are apartments that you rent for between $1,000 and $2,000 a month, and you get very significant space. This is an image of a lifestyle here. We have a painter. He's a world-class painter that paints in one of the studio spaces. So I always like to remind myself that first, I want to make a place, and then I want to make it relevant. And like, I've always thought that there were certain parts of Dallas growing up where I never wanted to go because it didn't feel relevant to me. And as I've gotten older, I began to understand that it doesn't feel relevant because there's no architecture there. There's no thinking behind the place. And I always thought that architecture makes a place relevant, but what makes a place? And space and landscape is what makes a place. You don't need any architecture in the woods, and yet the woods is an amazing place. And so I began to take that philosophy and started to make a place. After I created True North and brought people to the neighborhood and saw that there was desire, I had a waiting list of 400 people for 10 units at True North. And this was a neighborhood where every single person told me, do not touch it. And so I started to get optimistic. And this was, this is the block across the street. I'm gonna show, I renovated all these buildings around the park, but the park is really what I kind of started with as an idea. I wanted to make a place. And so I took this parking lot. This is the day I bought the property. I took this picture. And this is probably, recently, this summer, I think. I think I took this picture a few weeks ago. So we took this space and we planted 110 trees in a 8,000 square foot parking lot, which was a parking lot. And then I'll tell you a bit about the process. So if you looked at the historic photo, all this land was occupied. This was the site of 2 firehouses, an engine and a house. So the house is where the firemen slept and the engine is where they kept the truck. And what we understood, Julie Bargman was a landscape architect that I worked with. Her non-negotiable was that, and this is a philosophy that's motivated so much of our work now, is that the work must emerge. It cannot descend. I'm not going to sit here and give you an idea about what we should do landscape-wise until I've actually gone to the site and dug and understood what's in the ground, because this was a place where something used to be. And I was, Julie and I got along great, and like the typical BS that everybody's trying to pitch me in a project to get my work, she had none of it. Like there was no resume, there was no packet, there was nothing. There was just ideas back and forth, and it was exciting. And we had a lot of fun talking about our ideas. Her non-negotiable was that the work had to emerge from the site. And so we started to dig, and as you could see, that was an asphalt parking lot. Asphalt typically covers something that exists. And what we started to unearth were pieces of the old buildings. This was a driveway that was in between the firehouse that was here and the engine that was here. If you look here, we started to find pieces of the old building in the ground. They demolished the buildings in 1973 and just pushed the remains into the basement. We started to take pieces of the building out and we started to make these islands. I never submitted any permits. I never got any construction documents done. We literally by hand designed the park on site. And you can see, in one of the buildings that I owned here was built as a bank originally. We cut out the walls of the bank vaults and made those the benches in the park. You can see them there. And so literally in Julie's non-negotiable was that something emerged from the place. And now this site is surrounded by, again, another world-class restaurant. Our cafe is here, which is an extension of the public space. And there's a great bakery and bagel shop. And now I have a tech company that we just built the headquarters for here. This place that we made has attracted people to the neighborhood that I never would have imagined. There's another image of the before and after. So these buildings were what was around them. I'm just going to quickly go through some of the images of our renovation of them. This building was an old radiator shop that we turned into a restaurant faced to the park. This building was originally built, it was a Jeep upholstery factory, and now it's our cafe, it's a bakery, it's our office, a jiu-jitsu studio, an artist studio, another restaurant. This building was a dry cleaner originally. It's a beautiful building. And there was an alley in between the two. And so here's a story. This is how architecture can solve problems. So I had a company, a tech company, that wanted 7,000 square feet, and they wanted to be in Core City. It's a language learning app that's actually a public company called Duolingo. And they knew they wanted an animation office in Detroit, and everybody was vying to get their business, but they only wanted to be in Core City because they wanted to be in the creative area. And so I didn't have 7,000 square feet for them. I had 7,000 square feet upstairs and downstairs here, but I didn't want to give up the space downstairs because it opens to the park, and that should be more public-facing space, not a private office. Nobody wants to be in the park looking at people clicking around their computer. We needed a place where people could go. And so Ish, the architect that I work with, and I looked at this, and we came up with the idea. We had a one-story building adjacent to this two-story building, and there was an alley in between the two. And so I had 3,000 square feet here, and I had 3,000 square feet here. And so we built the second story on top, and so we were still short 1,000 square feet. So what we did was we closed in the alley and on both sides, and we got another 1,000 square feet out of the alley, which is where their kitchen is, a private office, their restrooms, and their meeting room. And so we used all the structure that we had. We actually, you'll see, let's see here. I'll come back to it. We actually used all the structure that we had to make this great office for them, which you'll see pictures of shortly. So here's just some other images of the kind of companies and ad agency. So this is another thing that's really important to me. I mean, people talk about business, and my definition of business is that it must actually create value. And a lot of people, I think, in business, as I see it, want to create a lesser quality product and figure out how to charge more for it. And I think that that's fine. You know, I don't have a specific commentary on it except that I don't want to do it. And what I think value is that you either create something new for a comparable price to what exists, or you create the same thing that exists for a lower price. There's innovation in either one of those things, and there's new value to offer people in either one of those directions. The ultimate objective is that I'm able to do both if I'm become a magician somehow. But that's the ultimate objective, is to always either innovate in one direction or the other, either innovate in how efficiently we build something or innovate in how exceptional the thing is and try to keep the price comparable to what already exists. And I'm able to get customers in either direction if I do that. It's a lot of work, but I'm able to get customers and tenants. Beautiful tree canopy. And we're just going to eat this whole neighborhood up with trees. I love it. So this is our radiator shop. When we started to work on this building, which had a roof, when we put the HVAC equipment on this building, and the roof started to cave in. And you know, everybody's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And like in Detroit, I remember, this is not Provost, Utah, this is Detroit. Like, I always want my commitment tested, you know? When the roof caves in on a building that I'm in the middle of working on, and like there's a significant expense in rebuilding the entire building, I say, wow, do I really want to do this project? And the answer was absolutely, because we took this building and we made it into the most beautiful restaurant. And it has a chef that came from Argentina. Again, rules set you free. I designed this entire restaurant with our architect, but the concept was that there was no gas coming into the building. I was tired of restaurants where I leave feeling not good, and so I said, you're only cooking on open fire. There's an open fire grill and an open fire oven. It's all wood burning. There's no connection to gas line here, and you know, and it takes a particular type of chef to know how to drive that car. And so this is a chef from Argentina that came up. I didn't know him before, but I knew that if I built something so significant and, you know, dangled the keys in front of him, it would be an opportunity that he couldn't turn down. And so we have this beautiful restaurant. And again, it was named one of America's best 6 restaurants by the James Beard Foundation in 2021. It's a phenomenal space. We sunk the bar. Like, I wanted to put the bar in the middle of the restaurant, but I didn't want people sitting at different heights. So we sunk the bar 2 feet so that everybody sits at the same height, and you always have a view out to the park. And here's a view from the park. One of the ways that we actually create value is I'm insistent about paying very close attention to what we're already given. I mean, to me, you know, if you walk outside while the sun's setting, you could be in a parking lot and it's beautiful. I think that we're already given so many things that are so astounding, from tree canopy to quality of light to the sounds of birds chirping. I think that we can really make spaces exceptional if we already pay attention to what we're given. And it really doesn't cost anything to harness light in an interesting way. If you just consider how light comes into a space, just take an extra few hours doing it, you've solved so many problems of quality of space. And that's the way I try to promote the thinking in our projects. Here's our cafe. We opened up the facade of that large factory out to the park. It used to face the main street, but we opened the facade to the park. You can see it here. And this is like a business that's there. This is a coffee roaster that's there. Bakery. This is our office again. That's upstairs. This is another restaurant that faces the park. So you know, I always ask architects non-negotiables, and as I've gotten better at what I do, I also say something to architects when I start working with them. So it's contrary to what I'm saying here, but they kind of go together, which is I sit down and like I said, it's important for me to have a point of view. It's what creates energy in a project. And I tell architects, I'm as interested in architecture as you are in the wood that you use for the floor here, you know? And an architect is interested in the quality of wood. They are, but it isn't the project. It isn't what they're doing. And architecture is not what I'm doing. It's just one tool that will enhance the larger objective of our work, which is the creation of culture, and the making of place. And in the same way that a really nice oak is really going to make a space much nicer, it isn't the idea, and it shouldn't be the idea. But I believe that we should believe in architecture and we should believe in landscape architecture because, you know, like I say here, it's like being a priest that doesn't believe in God. It's just astounding to me that so many people take on the responsibility of reorganizing the elements of our earth. Development is an astoundingly difficult job. Literally what we're doing is we're taking elements out of the earth and rock and concrete and forging steel, and we're reorganizing them to our benefit. And it just astounds me that people don't think about how those elements should be organized through the lens of architecture. So here's another shot of that building that I told you about where the tech company has a headquarters. This is their office. The building was totally abandoned and derelict when I bought it, and it's very beautiful now. Here's an entrance. Here's the alley. So anywhere, when I walk people through this project, anywhere you see brick was existing, and anywhere you see drywall is new. It's really simple to understand the DNA of the project. And so this was all open. This was an alley, and then we closed it in with glass. So you already saw some of this in our park, but this is really important to us. I don't believe in demolishing. I believe in dismantling. And I think that there's so much energy in everything that's already been built, even if we think that it's not beautiful, that we should always try to reuse what we've been given. I don't like the aggressive act of demolishing things. And it manifested in our park. Julie taught me this significantly. You know, we didn't just build a park on top of what was there. The buildings that were demolished, we actually gave them dignity again by putting the pieces of the building that were in the ground. We put them back to work as our ground covering. And if we dismantled those buildings in the first place, there's a lot more we probably could have done with it. And this is a project that really represents that philosophy. So this is it's called the 5K project. And again, this talks about the power of architecture. This building was on the demolition list for Detroit. It's here, and it was in terrible condition. And it was filled to the brim with garbage when I bought it. It was a bold purchase to the eyes, but when you know what I paid for it, you say, well done. And so, you know, we didn't have an interesting building here. This was built after World War II. It was built as a supermarket. It was built for utility. Detroit was booming at that time. So that's a moment in Detroit's boom when they stopped believing in architecture. If you look at the genesis of cities, it's quite simple. When they're trying to make the place, they build parks and they build beautiful buildings. And once the place is already made and they're just trying to service demand, they build junk. And quite frankly, and this was an example of that. We had this pancake-shaped building that didn't have any architectural value. It was built with utility. It had windows only because they wanted people to see inventory. They poured terrazzo concrete floors. To us, it's a luxury to have a beautiful terrazzo floor. To them back then, it was the cheapest floor that they could put in a grocery store. And we had to figure out how we were going to turn this building into architecture. We did not want to demolish it and just sit on the land. We wanted to dismantle it and figure out how to make it interesting. So our idea was to bring light into the middle of the building. And we cut these 3 courtyards into the building, and we were able to make spaces within the building that have beautiful views and great light with these courtyards. This was the roof when I started to work on the building. This was the building when I got all the garbage cleared out. We cut the courtyard, the skylights out. This was the building when I bought it. That's what it looked like. This is the building today. And so we had this beautiful terrazzo, and Julie Bargman was the landscape architect on this project again. And like, we'd already agreed on so many things, and it wasn't cost effective or time effective to do this, but it's informed so much of our work. And I will always trade my time and a reasonable amount of capital to represent the belief. Like, I'd rather have a project that in 10 years really reflects who I am and what I believed at that time than a project that doesn't and maybe cost me a little bit more and a little bit less time, or cost me a little bit less. So instead of demolishing the floor where we put the courtyards, we very skillfully cut the terrazzo floor into tiles, and we made them into benches. And we dismantled the floor instead of busting it out, and we have a stock of these terrazzo tiles that we are still using on our projects. And instead of pouring concrete in places, is it economically efficient? No, but is there a story to be told? Do you want to come see this project now? Yes. You know, and anybody who comes is just so taken back by the fact that they don't see things done like this. And it isn't even that the ideas are that big anymore. It's just that I always tell myself, like, if I'm ever at a point where I have to make a decision about whether I should do something or not, if I think about other developers, if I say they would never do that, that's exactly when I know when to do it, because that's what distinguishes the project. That's how my projects will not look like anyone else's. They will look just like mine. And that's exciting to me. And we cut these big slabs, and people have lunch out here, and these courtyards we planted 26 ginkgo trees. Ginkgo trees are beautiful trees with beautiful leaves. They're the slowest growing tree. So we like that they were in the courtyard because you can really tell the passing of time with a ginkgo tree. They grow up and they grow slowly, and they don't make a huge ball of a canopy. They grow intelligently. And we have these beautiful courtyards. And this building's rented to Detroit's most creative small ad agency. They do a lot of work for the car companies. The entire building was leased to them. So I've talked a little bit about this, culture versus nature. Like, it kind of blows my mind that people don't think like this more often, but the day that I finish building a building, the building begins to deteriorate. And the day that I finish planting a landscape, it only gets better. So if I put a disproportionate amount of money into a building and not into a landscape, in 10 years, the entire project's going to be tired. But if I put a disproportionate amount of money into the landscape, into the thing that grows, in 10 years, I will have the most amazing place. And even if the building needs renovation, it's a no-brainer because it's in such a beautiful place. And so I always am trying to not cover all the land that I have with building, but again, listen to the zoning code, cover 35% of the land, which is what the zoning where I work tells me I can cover, and use the rest of that 65% for landscape and to actually make a place. And so you'll start to see how that manifests. This is our project. This is 8 apartments with 188 trees. We literally planted 188 trees. And the way that we did that economically is that, again, Julie Bargman is kind of I call her, she's a jazz musician. She can improvise significantly. And our property manager who's here, he used to have relationships in the landscape business. We went to all the tree farms and we said, give us everything you have that you don't want. And Julie's only non-negotiable on this was that she wanted the entire understory to be one type of tree, which is the redbud. But everything else, the rest of the 100 trees that you plant, 120 trees that you plant, it can be whatever you get. And we went to every tree farm. We said, we have $25 per tree. Give us what you have. Come on. And we were able to buy all these trees, and we have kind of this gang of misfits is what we call it. But what that creates is a forest. And we have a beautiful project here. That's the context. Again, you can see the context. You have burned out buildings. This all used to be homes. And here's our project here. And that's just us building it. Very pretty picture. And so you have this beautiful place where people want to spend time outside, and a farm is next door, and you can see the green canopy here. And, you know, a lot of people, a lot of university students, architecture students and business students, all of them, they come to see the projects in Detroit. We give a lot of tours. And the question they always ask me is this a green project? And I'm like, just look at it. I can't answer the question. Just use your eyes. And then I ask them a question to clarify what I mean by that. It's like, well, tell me what is a greener project? A building that has absolutely no tree canopy, but solar panels that gives you most of the power that the building needs. Not most, maybe some of the power. But it has no shade because it needs all that sun and it doesn't have any tree canopy. Or a building that doesn't need to use air conditioning because it's constantly in a tree canopy. It's constantly covered by shade. What's a greener building? And I said, you guys asked me the question, so you must know the answer. And you know, it becomes obvious. It's a green project, you know? And so this is that we always try to work with our intuition over our technology. I don't want to rely on UV windows. I don't want to rely on heavy HVAC equipment. I don't want to rely on cutting edge this or that, smart homes. It doesn't matter to me. It's all trends. All I care about is quality of light, quality of space, and quality of landscape. And those are intuitive things that we always used to know as people. Technology has taken us away from it. Here's another shot of the front yard there. These are what the apartments look like for $1,000 a month. Amazing, right? I've talked enough about this. So this was a project that we recently completed. Apple just did a world launch of their new product, and they featured this project in their launch. The next problem that we wanted to deal with is parking. And I've gone to a lot of zoning. I do ask for parking variances because I think they're a bit antiquated. And Detroit has so much space anyway that I don't think that we need to focus so much on parking. And I once went into a zoning meeting and they're like, you have a parking problem. And I said, no, you have a walking problem because you know, if my restaurant isn't good enough to make you want to walk an extra 20 steps, then I've got a bigger problem than parking. And you know, there's so much space in Detroit that, you know, it's ridiculous that you want me to use land. And we know what that looks like. They tore down beautiful buildings in downtown Detroit to get parking there. And we know what that looks like in Dallas. You end up with a city that's a sea of cars. I don't know. I haven't spoken to my soul, but I know it doesn't like those places. And so we took this lot that was really the most valuable piece of commercial real estate here on the corner, and I wanted to try an experiment with parking. And we converted this into what I call parking. The name's up here. It's Parking. We planted 80 trees and 28 parking spaces. And the idea was that we created a park when there's no cars there. It's a beautiful green space. It's an amenity to the neighborhood. And there's still a place for people to park. So, and in terms of the habitat, you know, maintenance and things like that, we use all the volunteer species of Detroit. When we make a public space like this, we try to look at all of the trees that are around us. It was different with Caterpillar. We had a different idea there. And we try to use species. We plant weeds. We seed with clover everywhere. We don't have any lawn. We have some lawn in True North. That was before. I wanted to renovate the landscape of True North, but then I decided it shows you the genesis in my thinking. Like, we have lawn there. We no longer do any lawn. It's all clover field, which is a weed traditionally. And this is what it looks like. I mean, this is all weed, but it's so beautiful. And what we did was we built berms so that the cars are totally covered and shielded. You don't see the cars within the parking lot. So this is the neighborhood when I started. Then you can see True North here. Just came in, the studies are here. You can see where the park goes, and that's where 5K is up there. And then Caterpillar comes in down here. And then you see a little more action. The park's starting to get built here. And then Caterpillar is getting done over here. This building has some architecture now, some lights getting in there. And that's the neighborhood today. So, thanks. So it's been a fun and interesting process, and I'll continue a bit. I have a little bit more. So my philosophy is very Detroit specific, but we tried to bring it to Texas here. We did a project in Fort Worth, Texas, and trying to use this philosophy. And what I realized is that it's very Detroit specific. You know, something like this, build what's needed and not more. When you have a low acquisition cost, you don't have to overdevelop property. You can buy a piece of land that's inexpensive, and you can dedicate so much of that space to public space and to landscape, and you can underdevelop the actual built real estate. And I continue to try always to build a minimal amount of developed space to subsidize a maximum amount of public space. And I believe that that's a philosophy that I think I can safely say that no other developer is trying to do that. And when you do try to do that in an honest way, in a real way, you end up with a place that's like no other. And that's the idea. And so these are just some other shots of Genesis. So you see this corner here is where the parking goes, and that's where the park is, and that's where True North was. This is before I got started. And then this is a little bit later, and this is now. So the park, this. And we're actually building another park here right now, and this building's being renovated. That's a nice one, before and after. You see here, this is what the building looked like when I purchased it. This is now. Again, this shot is when I purchased the building, and this is now. This shows you the context of everything. So here's all those buildings, the 5K projects here, where the courtyards were cut out. There's the parking lot. This is all land that I own. Again, the rest of the acreage is all through here. We're actually building, the next idea is we're building an entire 2-acre park along this entire corridor here. And then I'm going to develop all this as the face of the park. And really, it's inspired by Central Park. Like, the issue in Detroit is that you have a lot of land, and nothing distinguishes one piece of land from another. So my theory on that was that, the most valuable property typically is, property that affronts nature. So park property, Central Park property, beachfront property. So I had the idea that how do I get this property that really doesn't have value right now to potential tenants or potential partners? How do I make it valuable? And the idea is to build an entire Central Park here that I can walk somebody through the park, which is a much lesser investment than a building, but makes them say, wow, I can have a hotel right here on the end of this park. Whereas if I took somebody there right now, they'd be like, you're crazy. And all I have to do is do the thing that's most fun to me, which is plant trees and make a park here. And then suddenly this real estate all becomes very valuable. And I say that, with humility, but also with confidence, because that's what we've been doing. This park was built before any tenants were here. And now this is the most sought after commercial corridor in Detroit. So chase the idea, not the trend. I think that we should be motivated from what's within us and what the actual idea is that's motivating us, and not things that are happening outside of us, trends. I don't like when people talk about program first. I don't like when people talk about co-working spaces and this and that. I don't care. It's about making space, quality indoor and outdoor space. What is the idea for how you're going to deliver that space for a higher quality and a lower cost? That's it. That's the obsessive, compulsive objective. So this is our project in Fort Worth. This was the site. It's in the south side part of Fort Worth next to the hospital district. This was the site. And then this is the project now. Again, an amazing landscape. We have these futuristic buildings designed by Marlon Blackwell coming out of this primordial moon landscape, which is 100% flagstone. It feels like nothing else. We have 8 residences upstairs. Now, this was a site, you have to understand, back to my philosophy, develop as little as you can. This was a site where we could have built 200 apartments. This could have been like a building like one over here, or like these apartment buildings that you see being built everywhere, which is like cinder block on the ground floor, then 5 stories of wood construction. We could have built 200 apartments on this site. And we decided to do 8 with 8 offices, 1 restaurant, 1 cafe, and 1 gallery space. And we have beautiful landscape here. Again, focus on mastery, not scale. Like, I make so many mistakes, and, people think that I love the Quonset hut. I don't love the Quonset hut. It's just every single time I finish a project with the Quonset hut, I learn something. And so I'm like, I've got to do it again. And it's an attempt to try to master something. I don't want to master the Quonset hut so that I can build thousands of them. I want to master it so that I master it and I understand exactly what I've spent the last 10 years of my life working with, and feel satisfied with what I've completed and understood through working with that. At the end of the day, architecture is just a piece of trying to create culture, and culture is also what kind of inspires space. I always like to say that, Apple was the first company that really took on the challenge of trying to understand hardware and software. Everybody else has really divided those two things. It's very difficult to do both. And culture is the software of development. And, we've owned restaurants, we own cafes. I'm trying to both master the hardware of development and at the same time very much understand and program it with a specific type of culture. And so it's very gratifying to me when I see spaces that we've worked with, whether it's our own restaurants or cafes or tenants that I've specifically attracted, when the hardware and software are really working together and both curated by our office, it's just amazing. And this is really the objective. This is the 100% wood fire restaurant. This is the public space at True North where yoga happens. This is an office. This is actually Ish. That's the architect. I've done about 7 or 8 projects with him. He designed Caterpillar, he lives in Caterpillar, and he works in Caterpillar. So, I'll zoom through this. It's not so interesting. We're continuing with our philosophy where this is Edwin Chan's model of a project that's under construction right now. He doesn't work on a computer. He only does physical models. He was Frank Gehry's design director for 30 plus years, and he really only works in model. We both insist on no renderings. We want to be a little bit surprised. But models, basically, the way we think about it, are part of the creative design process. It's how we resolve questions. It isn't how we represent the project. It's how we answer questions that we have about the project. And so it's a very collaborative process. I take my whole office out to his office for a week, and we work very significantly, very closely with him in making these projects. So the idea of this project is kind of interesting, I hope. I had land to do a 30-unit apartment building, and that's what the zoning said I could do. And so it's 2 sites, but instead of doing a 30-unit apartment building, I was trying to understand what my non-negotiables were, and always it's about space and landscape and views, light, space, landscape, light, space, landscape. If I believed in tattoos, I'd get one that says that. And so what we wanted to do was we took this 30-unit apartment building and we crumbled it into 15 duplexes. So we crumbled it, instead of having a 30-unit block building, which is what we know what it would look like, 10 apartments on each floor, a hallway down the middle with an apartment on each side. Each apartment has one view out. Also, living in Mies taught me that you should always try to get light from more than one vista, one location. It gives you a lot. You have a morning side and an evening side. So I want people who are paying me $1,000 a month in rent to also have that same experience of space. And they're going to come and live there, and they're never going to want to move. And they don't know exactly why until maybe they ask me, but they're just going to know that living there is like living nowhere else. And so we crumbled this 30-unit apartment building into 15 duplexes. Now, this is an intelligent move too. It isn't just a design decision, because when you build a duplex, you're still in residential building code, which means that I don't have to invest money in ADA restrictions. I don't have to invest money in fire suppression. You start to understand where are you putting money that doesn't benefit the customer really in terms of their lived experience at all. And there's so many things in zoning code when you go from residential code to commercial code, which would be a multifamily, a 30-unit building would go into commercial code, that I'm investing in things that don't increase the quality of lived experience at all and actually diminish the quality of the space and light. So this project is going to be an interesting experiment. It's under construction now. These pictures are a little bit old, but you can see it's right behind Caterpillar. And I'm building it in 2 phases because, again, everything's built kind of by hand. I have my own crew. It's a really important part of mastering the hardware. We have our own construction crew, and it'll continue up this block here. But here's 5 of the duplexes here. This is another site for the park. Here's where the parking lot is down here, and our block is over here with the park. We're doing another park here, and we're renovating this building right now. We have a restaurant, a kind of a bar music space, and an art gallery that are all going to be in this space. And then we have a large park here. This is the beginning of that large 2-acre park that's going to be like our central park that makes the neighborhood. Again, this is a shot. This is happening here. This is where that park is. This is where the park is now. Those are the firehouses that I built the ground out of. This is where my office is. That's 5K building there. And again, dismantle, never demolish. Even when we're busting up concrete, we save the pieces and we reuse them as our ground cover. This is sidewalk that we had to remove on a project to give access to our construction crew, we save the pieces of sidewalk and we reuse them as our ground cover when we make a park. This is the building that's on the other side that we're working on right now. These are just some shots. The idea is that I was so frustrated because so many people come to our restaurants and come to our buildings and they can never imagine what they looked like before. And it's like, oh, this is cool, this is beautiful, and I'm like, no, but you don't know what it was like before. So I was like, I'm not gonna paint the outside of this building, I'm not gonna touch the outside of this building, and anything that's new, I'm gonna make people know this is new and this is old. So the idea was leave it all rough like this, but then get the most expressive glazing that I possibly can. And so we have this awesome bright orange glazing that we're just putting into this old building. Really exciting, it's fun. And like, this is something interesting. Even here, like, we had a door. I think Louis Kahn said the brick will tell you what it wants to be. And so like, we had this designed, the architect had designed this as one big glass wall for this right here. And I was like, we even cut out the brick here to put the lintel in here that was gonna go over the glass door. And I was like, this wall is so interesting to me. I don't want to do that. And I said, let's put it in a museum case. So let's put the glass that we ordered on the outside of the wall. And let's leave this wall the way it is, except let's cut one more opening just so people know what this building used to be like. And it isn't just this thing that we're not just descending on this old thing. We're actually emerging from its habitat. And so we end up with this kind of condition. Is it pretty? I don't know, but there's an idea there. And when ideas and beauty come together, intelligence and beauty together is a really nice harmony, but I think I would prioritize ideas over beauty sometimes. And so these are our terrazzo tiles. Like, you see, this was old concrete floor from 1910 that we ground, and then this was where we'd cut out to bring the plumbing in, and instead of pouring concrete, we used our terrazzo tiles that we took out of 5K, and you can see them here. We love these moments where just all these elements meet. And we like to seek and honor beauty where others don't see it. If people tell me that something's ugly, I want to do it more, unless it's a really good architect. I think bad ideas are often where really interesting things happen. Bad ideas to the masses, not bad ideas to me. I really try to trust my intuition and go from there. And then I like to have fun and be smart. If I'm making dumb decisions, it's definitely not fun. So that's it. Thank you very much. So I think that for me, the most fun part is question and answer. So I hope people have some questions. It's a great opportunity to really test to see if I know what I'm talking about. I could have rehearsed that for days. I didn't, but I could have. I've actually rehearsed it for years because it's just what I'm doing. I spend all my time doing it. But if anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer them. Yes?
On one of your pictures, I saw a big church, and that made me think of, what do your neighbors think when you're doing all this?
Yes, good question. The question's, there's a church there, and what do my neighbors think of what we're doing? So the church was abandoned when we first came. It's now kind of occupied a little bit. It's owned by an investor that considers me an employee, basically, and I'm increasing the value of his property, and he does things here and there. But I say that because there were 3 operational houses in the neighborhood. And socially, politically, culturally, right, there's baggage here. There's somebody that's not from Detroit, Detroit is an 80% black city, somebody that's not from Detroit coming to Detroit. And so I understood the amount of sensitivity that was required in working in that neighborhood. One of the reasons I wanted to work there was because there weren't existing conflicting interests. And before I started any of my work there, I knocked on the 3 houses, and they were all owned by old-time real Detroiters. They'd owned their homes since the 60s. One was Janine Woods on 16th Street, one was Lady Worthy on 17th, and one was Robert Reese on 18th Street. And what I told them was really simple. It's nice to meet you. I'm Philip Kafka. I bought some property here. I'm going to be doing some development. I said, you own your house and you own your land. And as the world sees it, what you own is stock in this neighborhood. And I'm going to be increasing the value of your stock. And I work for you. So here's my phone number. I'm your employee. If you have any issues, you call me. And Janine Woods had the best answer. She said, Well, it's about time you got here. This is Grand River and Warren. This is the best intersection in Detroit. What the hell took you so long? Okay? So, like, it's interesting because the few people that stayed there, I've learned so much about pride of place, so much about not only working with existing conditions, but living an inspired and happy life within existing conditions. And the few people that remain there, the few, literally few, love the place. And as long as I love the place with my work as much as they love the place, they love what I do. And they've been very excited to have people to say good morning to. The neighborhood now has police patrol. The neighborhood is attended to. We have street lights. We have traffic lights. So it's brought good attention to them. Not to mention, part of my philosophy of public space, they can't often eat at that restaurant, the Argentinian restaurant. I mean, the price point is even difficult for me to eat there frequently. But they can enjoy the park that the restaurant subsidizes. So I'm always trying to find that balance of how do I service all the interests that matter. If the work only services the interest of the local community, it's not big enough. And if it only services the interest of the international architecture community, it's not sensitive enough. It needs to do both simultaneously. And so I've really been focused on that, and the neighbors, therefore, love what I'm doing. Yes?
So the Fort Worth project, what drew you to the medical district in Fort Worth, the Magnolia Avenue? Was it the culture? Was it the vibe? I'm just curious, what drew you to that specific site in Fort Worth?
I think that, actually my dad had bought that property a while back. And I think that he liked the site. He liked that for the same reasons that I might like something. I think there was an opportunity to do something creative there because at the time when he purchased the property, it was a lower acquisition cost. It was, yes, these ideas of mine didn't come out of nowhere. And, I think that you were probably thinking, my dad was probably thinking about it the same way. Buy the property for a nice price and have room to actually think about creative ideas there. And now the area is walkable. It's vibrant. It's very interesting. Yes.
With your principles, are there any that you've kind of grown out of or any that they're kind of waiting in the wings to be tested?
Yeah, all the time. They're changing all the time. A lot of the ones that I've grown out of, I've taken out. New ones, I changed this white building, this project. Okay, I changed this significantly. So, for example, I haven't even written a principle for this yet. Oh, actually, I have. It's, if it can't be remade the way it's currently built, then it can't be removed. So, for example, I originally had ordered, and I ate this cost. I'd ordered glazing to go all the way down to the ground here. Okay, this was actually, you can see it here. It's cinder block. This was all cinder block because the original building had this beautiful brick ledge, which is like 16-inch thick brick walls with these great limestone caps that sit on that. And then there was glass that was here originally, and then they filled in the glass with cinder block. So that was all cinder block. And originally our design plan was to remove all this brick below. And I came back and I was like, that doesn't feel right to me. We're going to take apart this, and on the spot I came up with the principle, if it can't be rebuilt the way it currently exists, then we cannot remove it. And it's going to be an interesting one to test. And I only have one more building to renovate, really, in Detroit, and it's a banger. It's like the best building I have. It's awesome. So I'll test that principle there. It'll be a great opportunity to do that. And yes, they're evolving all the time. They evolve through mistakes. I mean, like I look at some of my projects, and I all I can ever see sometimes are the mistakes that I made, and that's good because it makes me remember what I shouldn't do as I continue to work. I think a mistake is only a mistake if I stop working. If I make a mistake and I say, oh, development's not fun, then I've just eaten the mistake. But I consider the mistake basically a down payment on the next project. And so maybe a principle that informed that mistake is going to get taken away, and a new one will be developed all the time, like a lizard's tail. Yes.
I have a question. You've got 23 acres. It's kind of an island. I'm familiar with Detroit. I'm from St. Louis. We have a lot of the same issues. Have you given thought to how you connect to other nodes or expand your footprint in the future?
Yes. I mean, you expressed it perfectly because the way that I always talk about the urbanism of Detroit, the urbanism of Detroit is the same as the country, the nationhood of Greece. Greece is basically a country of islands that's divided by the Mediterranean Sea. Detroit is a city of neighborhoods where the sea is basically the land where there's nothing happening. And instead of getting in a boat and going from Mykonos to Crete, you get in your car and you go from Core City to Corktown, and people are basically traveling by boat. I think that it's an existing condition that I try not to look outside of my own work. I only try, I hope that it inspires other people to connect to me and to build towards me. But if I start to worry about that problem, it eats me alive because, like I've always said, like a lot of developers want to come to Detroit and their answer for solving this issue is to create a lot of density somewhere. And I say creating density in Detroit is like trying to push yourself out of quicksand. It's like the place doesn't want to be that. It's space. And so you might see it as a problem that it's not connected to another island, and I just see it as vacation in Greece. You know, it's something that it's beyond my purview, you know? It's out of my control in a way. And there's so much that happens from the city offices that I just have no say over, that I just really try to stay focused on the land that I own and slowly maybe buying more here and there when I can. I'm not really focused on acquisition and just trying to make the best work possible so that it radiates out and hopefully attracts more good work around it, and hopefully it'll all connect one day. Yes.
You grew up here, so you're well aware of what our climate is, but it's getting hotter and hotter and drier and drier. And your projects in Michigan and Fort Worth, in Michigan, I've been there, they're fantastic. Are you looking to adjust, or how would you, I mean, you couldn't just plant 100 trees around your restaurants and huts in Fort Worth, they drop and die. So what are you doing, or what influences you to adapt or change, or what are you looking at, or as challenges when you've got new construction in a climate like Texas versus renovation and what you're doing in Detroit?
I think that, so it's a question about climate and how it affects the way we think about our projects. Is that right? So I think that I think that these questions, it's funny, we look for technology to solve these questions, but we just will not compromise on what we're willing to do. And I think that I always try to think about, like, how would somebody before air conditioning have dealt with this building site? And they would have basically just made all the openings face north and south. And then they would have shaded the east and the west side as much as they possibly could. And I think that as you have more tree canopy and more tree cover, you still need irrigation in Texas, but less because there's more shade on where the roots actually are. And I think that, again, to follow intuition is my greatest teacher. I think that, honestly, if we assess the Fort Worth project, it got away from me in that. Like, there's things about the project that don't follow that perfectly. I got too caught up in the beauty of the project, and it's a beautiful project. It's not as intuitive. It focuses more on, you know, the beauty of the building than the intuition that's required. But I think that as we develop projects, you know, I always just try to listen to my intuition and try to make decisions that would have been made 100 years ago because it was already there. That's why we walk into the factory space, like where my office is. If we go to where my office is, they have these beautiful sawtooth skylights, and it's amazing space because it was before lighting was really prevalent. So they needed good natural light. It's just so simple, you know? It's like, why is this space so good? Why does it have such nice natural light from the skylights? Well, because it was built before there was a lot of electricity capabilities. You know, it's like, and so that is what begins to inform the way I'm trying to think. So I didn't get to the picture, but sorry. We can still keep trying if you want. Oh, here. There. We have these amazing sawtooth skylights. You know, not because any architect said, oh, that'll be pretty, but because they were like, we need natural light and we need indirect light, so we make them sawtooth because people are working here. And the quality of light in this space, you can see I don't have any lights on in here. Look at the quality of light in this space. And that's just happened because they made it. If I follow the same intuition that they followed, then it would, you know, lead me to a similar kind of place if I'm deft and if I'm good at what I'm doing, and the architects that I work with too. So no time for more questions? Okay, great. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.